This conference will now be recorded.
There we go. All right, so welcome everybody. We're going to get started. Thank you for joining us, Pastor Bird. If you would like to start us off.
Yes, well, Addie, I want to thank you and thank all those who are online this morning. This is very creative. Of course, we had planned and wanted this to be at the Oakwood University Church, and we're looking forward to having actual physical fellowship, but we'll do virtual fellowship today. But this is also reminding me of how technology works and how we can all still connect without connecting. We can touch without touching. So I want to thank you, Addie. I want to thank Dr. Ashley and all those involved in making this program possible today. I know that we are in store for some great things. One of the presenters, Brother Hallbrook Polite, is a member of our church, great presenter, and all of our presenters are great. And I know we're going to have a good time, very informative and enlightening day. I want to get started because I know we're running a little behind. So I want to go ahead and have a word of prayer, and then after which, Addie, I'll turn it back over to you. Let's bow our heads. Father in heaven, this morning we thank you for another day of life, another day of health and strength. And though our world right now is filled with uncertainty and unrest, we are grateful for this opportunity that we can come together, glean, grow, and learn. I pray that, Lord, you would bless our session throughout this day. In Jesus' name, amen. Again, thank you on behalf of the Oakwood University Church. And our next gathering, I pray, will not be virtually, but I pray that we can be together physically. So therefore, we'll be able to have the opportunity for greater connection, fellowship, and touching. Thank you for a job well done, and I will now turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Pastor Bird. Excuse me while I adjust my sidekick here. All right. So to start out our day, again, I want to welcome everybody and say thank you for everyone who has decided to join us today. We understand that these are unprecedented times and everybody's kind of doing the best they can. I ask that everyone, aside from presenters, please remain muted and keep your cameras off unless you are a presenter. The format that we're following today is continuous. So we will have our panel to begin with, and then we'll move straight into the session, the first session, and then into the second session. At the very end is a survey that we would love for everyone to fill out, and that includes if you are a student that's joining us and if you need CEUs. Let's see. I do want to say that given the nature of the topics that we discuss, we understand that there are likely survivors in the room, and especially during this time of continued stress and isolation and these triggering happenstances that we're going through, I want to encourage each of you to practice your self-care. If something gets heavy and you need to put it down, we completely understand. We will have some advocates available towards the end, and I'll make sure that information is on the screen as well. If things do get too heavy, we want to make sure that you know where you can reach out to talk to somebody. All right. And forgive me while I navigate this. I too had technical difficulties this morning. So the reason that we wanted to convene this meeting today is this is a virtual version of the mini conference that we were going to host in person tomorrow. But we didn't want Sexual Assault Awareness Month to go by without us still meeting and having some webinars and discussions about these topics. And I think it's important because we are going through yet another paradigm shift in our culture, both just in the US and globally. So it calls into attention our everyday behaviors, the things that we get faced with that may be both uncomfortable, but there are also opportunities for change and growth. We've seen such a watershed moment with the Me Too movement and the conviction and jailing of two of Hollywood's biggest sexual predators. but it's also important that we recognize our own complacency and how we as a society approach interpersonal violence, including recognizing that a person or a culture's intersections can have a profound impact on whether that person or member of a group experiences how they experience interpersonal violence. So we know that research has demonstrated that, for instance, trans persons, especially Black trans women, are at an extremely elevated risk compared to a cis white male. And that highlights that the intersections of race, of gender, and sexual orientation are interwoven pieces to understanding how we understand the mechanisms that allow interpersonal violence to flourish insidiously. So Me Too was instrumental, it was necessary, and it was appropriate, but it wasn't necessarily inclusive. The very movement was hijacked from a Black woman, Tamara Burks. So our efforts today and in the future are efforts to call attention to the disparities that exist and to create and maintain space that is trauma-informed and inclusive and doesn't shy away from the realities of sexual violence in American culture. So that being said, I will cover our agenda for the day. All right. So we welcome Pastor Bird, and he brought us into the conference here. And you've heard my introduction. Again, my name is Addie Wagner. I'm the sexual assault prevention educator for Crisis Services of North Alabama, along with my colleagues here. The next thing we'll move into is the campus culture panel. And we have with us Liana Hill, Jolene Heckman, Tanisha Smith, Adrienne Matthews, and Regina Burden. And for a little bit of background on who these people are that you're virtually seeing. Excuse me. We have Hallbrook Polite. We also have Choya Wise. We have Jalita LaFontaine. And for our panelists, like I said, we have Jolene Heckman. She's the Domestic Violence Responder Program Director for Crisis Services of North Alabama. Liana Hill, Forensic Nurse Examiner Program Director for Crisis Services. Tanisha Smith, Crisis Prevention Counselor and Title IX Advocate for A&M. Regina Burden, Dean of Student Services at Drake State. And Adrienne Matthews, Assistant VP Vice President, Office of Student Services and Title IX Coordinator for Oakwood. And so what we're hoping to get across today, the objectives of why we're here. Do make sure that your mic is muted if you can. But the objectives are to obtain a firsthand relevant knowledge of current trends on local campuses, to gain an understanding of the mechanisms that drive domestic violence and interpersonal violence, and to gain insight into the archetypes and sexual stereotypes that affect Latinas and African American women. All right. I'm going to take myself off screen share. There we go. All right. Do we have all our panelists?
Yes, we're here.
Great. And Dr. Ashley, Helen Fischel, did you guys want to add anything before we go into our panel?
No, this is good. As long as we have all our panelists, and guys, you understand we're working in unusual circumstances here, right? And so I just want to do a quick roll call with the panelists just to make sure everybody's here before I turn it over to Ashley. Right, so if you could just, I saw Dean Matthews, you are here. right? And the other person, if you quickly identify ourselves one by one. Let's go with Ms. Smith, from A&M. Are you here?
Good morning. I'm here.
Good morning. Great. Good to see you. Okay. And then we have from Drake, Regina Burton. Are you here, Regina?
Yes, I am here.
Excellent. We're doing good. 3 for 3. And then we have Leanna Hill from Crisis Services.
Yes, good morning, everyone.
Greetings. And finally, Jolene Heckman from Crisis Services.
Good morning.
Good morning. Everyone is here. Our moderator for this morning is going to be Miss Ashley Mays. She's a student at Oakwood University in the social work department. Ashley, if you would make yourself visible, you are now on.
Can you see me? Sorry, this thing is a little slow.
No, we can't see yet, but you can keep talking until we do.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Again, just want to say welcome to the conference. I'm so glad you all can be here. And a special shout out to everyone who basically made this conference a reality for all of us. Before I introduce the panelists, I just want to say a couple words about our campaign. The hashtag UsToo campaign is a collaborative multi-campus initiative that brings awareness to college students and young adults about the subject of sexual assault, as well as neighboring concepts such as dating violence and stalking. This program was created through the initiation of the senior social working class at Oakwood University in response to the hashtag OUMeToo campaign seen on Twitter. And that campaign basically stemmed from the hashtag MeToo movement, which entails survivors anonymously telling their stories of sexual assault or if they were sexually harassed on social media. And they're basically just speaking out against sexual assault and empowering women and everywhere to not be afraid to do so. Also, with the help of Oakwood University Social Work Department, community social agencies such as AshaKiran, Crisis Services, college campus Title IX coordinators, and even neighboring college campuses, we hope to sustain this program and the event through its success and enlarge our territory or expand. We plan to bring awareness to the subject through continuous campaigning. This will aid in expanding our collaborative teams and spreading awareness not only through the entire state of Alabama, but hopefully to the entire nation. And we can begin doing so just by listening to the survivors and, most importantly, believing them. That's my little spiel. Like you said, I am Ashley Mays, a senior social work major at Oakwood University, and I will be your moderator this morning. So if you do have any questions, you can put them in the chat box, but we do have an initial question that we want to start with, and I hope our panel can answer. And we like to explain what Title IX is and why it's important and why it's on, college campuses.
Thank you, and good morning again. This is Adrienne Matthews. So Title IX is a federal statute, and it is enforced by the Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights. Some campuses also call their Title IX sexual misconduct policies. And it does protect people from discrimination based on sex in education programs or activities. And any institution who receives federal funds falls under Title IX. And so you cannot be excluded from participating or denied any benefits or discriminated against in any educational program or activity. Interestingly, it also covers museums, libraries, because these are also centers of learning. So that's basically a definition for Title IX.
Thank you, Adrienne.
It's okay. Ashley's just having a little technical problem there, but Ashley, as soon as you get back in, let me jump back in. All right, I want to make sure, is anybody else wanted to add to that? All right, if not, let's go to the next thing then. The next question is, what is the difference between sexual harassment and sexual assault? And while you're doing that, folks, I just want to remind you, if you have a question, if you'd be so kind as to type in your question and to me, George Ashley, right? And so this is for confidentiality purposes, right? And then I can direct your question to the bank. And so once again, what is the difference between sexual harassment and sexual assault? Thank you.
All right, George, I'll answer that. The difference between sexual harassment and sexual assault. Sexual harassment is basically just verbal abuse, harassing someone, whether it's through media, social media, text message, even writing notes to a person, constantly calling their phone, just being very inappropriate with someone in the workplace or at school, making unwanted sexual advances to a person. That excludes any physical touch. Whereas whereas sexual assault encompasses the actual act of rape or touching someone inappropriately without their consent. That's pretty much the difference between what sexual harassment and sexual assault is.
Okay, thank you so much for your response. Our next question is, in terms of sexual violence and sexual harassment, what are some of the main trends? Yes. I'm sorry. So in terms of sexual violence and sexual harassment, what are some of the main trends that you are seeing on college campuses? I'll repeat the question. Sorry. In terms of sexual violence and sexual harassment, what are some of the main trends that you are seeing on college campuses?
Ashley, to answer that question, it could be someone publicly blasting a person via a social media site. That can definitely happen, being that most of our college students are very social media savvy, and that is a platform that they use to communicate. It could be someone screenshotting different dialogue between two individuals where it was supposed to remain private, but that person exposes that person. So that is one of the ways that sexual harassment takes place on a college campus, or it could also be, face-to-face verbal communication where an individual has asked the person, okay, I'm not interested, just leave me alone, and that person continues to pursue them, then they can definitely file a complaint, as well as make a report with the Department of Public Safety on the campus of Alabama A&M University.
I'm seeing a lot of trends. I agree with Tanisha that a lot of the cases that I've seen and I'm working with, where especially students that are on college campuses, is using social media as a tool of power and control. It reaches back through sexual assault, sexual harassment, domestic violence, just using it to say, look, I have this of you. If you don't do what I need to do or what I want you to do, I'm going to expose you. It's feeling that no matter, with our victims, knowing that no matter what they do, that's always going to be there. So that's an ongoing way that they're being re-victimized, is knowing that that's out there in social media, and their offenders have that, and there's ways to always get it, basically. I see that as a trend. I work almost every day with women and men who are experiencing that kind of re-victimization, is knowing that it's out there in social media, or it's been out there.
I'd like to add something. The trend that I have been seeing that tends to be relationship related. Most of the cases that I have dealt with have been involving relationships. So they're not necessarily people, who is a one-time deal, but it is mostly in relationships. And sometimes because of that, it is sometimes more difficult for the person to come forward because there are emotional feelings involved. But I would say that the relationship violence is prevalent.
I would agree as well. Most of the trends that I have seen have been in relationships and it's a matter of control, where one person has control over the other, and they continue to use that to maintain that relationship.
That's why it's so important, I feel, that we're out doing things like this and we're out educating and speaking to our young adults, anywhere from high school through college age, because letting them know that people there to help them, that there's ways to get through this, because it is in a lot of relationships. It is that, like we're saying, all of us have mentioned that power and control. And people think sometimes that the power and control is just domestic violence, but it's also is sexual violence. And it's also, you can be sexually victimized by your partner. And I think sometimes people think of it as only something that can happen with a stranger or at a party, or like they're at a party one night, but it's not. It can happen in your own home. And I think it's just getting that education out there and to help support and make our clients, our victims, our survivors know that there are people there to help them through it, that it's really important.
Also, I think it's important to understand, to remove the stigma associated with reporting these types of behavior. I think oftentimes with the college student community, there is a phrase of, snitches get stitches. And so we want to be able to remove that stigma associated with that so that people will come forward as a matter of protection and what's in the best interest of others.
Yes, thank you so much for all of your responses. Continuing to the next question, it's basically a follow-up question. And it states, what are some preventative dating relationship red flags in men or women that we should look for? And then I'll repeat it one more time. And the question was, what are some preventative dating relationship red flags in men or women that we should look for?
Well, when you begin to see a person is operating from a controlling manner, whether it's you tell them, okay, I have class and I don't get out of class until 4 o'clock, but by the time you get out of class, you have 10 missed calls, 30 text messages back to back. They're always questioning where you are, where have you been. That is a means of someone that's trying to control you. They're not calling and double texting you because they care about you. They're trying to control you pretty much. So some of the red flags are when you first meet someone, if they are trying to rush the process of even being intimate with you, that should be a major red flag, because you should want to get to know a person, even know their status in regards to any type of sexually transmitted diseases that they may have. So if someone is just really quick to try to want to manipulate you into intimacy, then that is definitely a red flag that I would always, warn students about.
I think isolation is a big one. What we see a lot is that they, at an early stage, they're starting to pull them away. They're doing things on their own. They're keeping them by their side. Going along also with what Tanisha said, the constant text messaging, knowing where they are, having that, that leash, basically. I hate saying it that way, but knowing they know how to contact you Because a lot of times when I've talked to people who've lived through this, they've said, you know, I didn't notice at the beginning, but at the beginning of school, like when I started college, I was hanging out with a lot of people. I was spending times with my roommate. I was involved in these clubs, and I was learning about my experience in school. And then the next thing I know, I don't remember the last time I hung out with somebody else besides him. And when I tried, he would get angry, and all of a sudden something would happen with me, you know, with him, that I would have to come and spend that time with him again. Isolation's a big one.
Yeah, and I would add to that,
Yeah, the break period.
sometimes there's a reality of overly being
Like the break period.
aggressive. What I've found in some cases, especially when it's in relationships, that one of the individuals is just really, really aggressive. They may take your cell phone, break your cell phone, not take no for an answer. And sometimes individuals see this as in the normal course of a relationship. Well, we just have arguments. But it can be overly aggressive. And sometimes violent to the point that, you know, it gets out of hand. So sometimes when you have those interactions with people, you may just think, oh, they just got angry and, you know, took my book or my textbook and I couldn't get it back. But those are also red flags that individuals can look for.
Also, sometimes they may put you down or embarrass you to make you have lower self-esteem, and that way you have to rely on them. So I think that's another red flag, where they may constantly demean you so that you feel less than.
I wrote a question literally similar to this. Yeah. Okay, thank you for all of the responses. This was very informative and we do appreciate them. Now we have a question from the audience. And the question states, how can you break the barrier of believing the victims? Again, how can you break the barrier of believing the victims?
That's an excellent question, because, you know, we so much want to say, well, just believe them. No matter what, just believe them. And in my line of work, that's what we do. I mean, it's hard as a human being not to have these gut feelings or want to investigate something. But when someone's telling you that something's happened to them, that's a very brave moment on them. They're taking a chance to feel comfortable with you and express one of the worst moments of their lives. So just taking the time to listen to them and believe them without making them feel like you're questioning them, by just, you know, letting them speak. I think that's the most important thing. And also when you hear talk from other people, and even if you're not on your job, if you're just out and about and somebody's like, oh, did you hear about that girl or whatever, say something. Just be like, hey, look, we're not in that circumstance. We're not part of that.
Okay.
What happened, you know? I think it's really important that we speak out even when we're not on our jobs or just anywhere, basically.
Would anyone else like to comment?
Yeah, I just want to say, I think it's important as students to have an accountability partner. Sometimes, you know, we have friends and we don't always listen to our friends, but if we have that one person that holds us accountable, who's willing to tell us the truth no matter what, I think that's important, to always have someone who's going to hold us accountable for our actions or our inactions.
Okay, like thank you so much for the responses. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I would like to remind everyone to please mute your mics. You may not think that we can hear background noise, but we absolutely can. So just please make sure that your mics are muted. Thank you.
Okay, another following question would be, what are the steps I guess a person should take if they have gone through, you know, sexual assault, especially being a college student? So how would they, what are the like initial steps they should take after being like assaulted or harassed?
So this is Liana. I'm a forensic nurse at Crisis Services. So if someone is being sexually assaulted, they can actually have a physical examination. You know, as a forensic nurse, we're there to actually collect evidence for the patients to go through the prosecution process. But hugely more important is making sure that patient is okay medically.
Yes.
We want to make sure that patient comes in and is seen by the medical staff to look for injuries on the body, to make sure that they don't have any sexually transmitted infections or concerns with pregnancy, and then just follow-up care too. So even though we collect evidence and we collect a sexual assault kit, that is not the main emphasis for what we do. And that's really important that patients out there or anybody that's been assaulted is aware of, because people think, well, I'm just kit done. And it's not. It's just make sure that patient is medically okay. Evidence and kit does occur, but it's not the most important part. We also work very closely with advocates who actually are there when that examination is done. And they're there, as we were talking earlier, and, you know, believing patients. They're there to make sure that patient is believed and supported throughout the whole process. And then care, because questions and things that come up throughout, you know, weeks, months later, we need to have that contact with that patient so that they get the care that they do need.
Okay, on our campus at Alabama A&M University, we have a collective team of individuals who support those individuals who make a complaint regarding sexual assault. The Department of Public Safety, DPS, which is our police department, they can funnel all sexual assault complaints. I serve as the advocate. So if a person came in, if a survivor came into the police station and stated, hey, I've been sexually assaulted, they would call me immediately. I'm on call 24/7, and I go meet with the individual and I refer them to Crisis Services. Liana does majority of all of our sexual assault rape kits for us, her and her team over at Crisis Services. My office is located in the Wellness Center. So if a student may be afraid to go to the police immediately, they could come over, ask to speak to me. It's strictly confidential. If you choose to report it, I assist with walking a person through that process. However, I do want our students to know, because it was a good question when whoever had asked about breaking the barriers of believing the victim. Well, how Title IX works, as everyone stated before me, it's really, yes, you want to be empathetic. You don't want to jump to conclusions. You don't want to look at that person as if you're judging them. But my role is very complex, because the alleged offender, if they were to come in to see me as well, I have to provide advocacy. I have to refer them so they can get help as well, so they can receive counseling, so they can go to a group to help with those issues. Because let's just keep it real. Your average person is just not out raping and sexual assaulting an individual. If a person is indulging in that type of behavior, there is a problem. So on our campus, we try to we are fair across the board, because with Title IX, it has to be a full-fledged investigation. You can't just, speak with a person that's claiming that they've been sexual assault and just like, oh, okay, well, yeah, we'll go from there. We actually go by the steps of sending them to Crisis Services so that they can get a rape kit done that can be presented in court if needed. So that is, if you're a student at Alabama A&M University, you could go to the Department of Public Safety, make your report. They filter those complaints out to the appropriate individuals.
I just wanted to add to that is that we can collect evidence depending on the person's age. So it is
Thank you for those responses. And just a question. Well, I'm sorry, the computer lagged. You can finish.
Okay, sorry. I just wanted to add that we can still collect evidence and we do not have to report to law enforcement. Now that does depend on the person's age, anybody over the age of 19, but there are students out there that are ready to report to police.
And whether for
so that's just important to know. Obviously, we want to make sure the patient is okay and they're safe, and that might involve the police being involved in the case, but there is that option that they can have an anonymous kit collected over the age of 19.
Okay, thank you for all the responses. And just, I guess, a following question. I know Alabama A&M stated their protocol on if their students, go to student services and they confide and say that they have been sexually assaulted and they said their whole process. Are there any other university representatives from different colleges or universities that can tell us like their process?
Yes.
Their process if the student were to come to student services? Go ahead.
Yes, at Oakwood and I'm pretty much on all the campuses, there also should be mandatory reporters so that students may feel closer to their professor, or they feel comfortable reporting what's happened to them to their professor, a staff person, maybe your supervisor. Those individuals are required to report. So on all campuses, there are what Title IX calls mandatory reporters. So those individuals, when they are reported to, they then can encourage the individual to see the Title IX coordinator, and those individuals are required to report to the Title IX coordinator as well what they have, what's been shared with them. There is a trained investigator that can contact the individual and start the investigation once that is the course that either of the individuals want to take. And also with our policy, we have adopted two processes. One is the informal and formal. And so depending upon which one of those courses of going further with the case, I'm sorry, were you saying something, Ashley?
Oh, no, ma'am, you can continue. Sorry.
Oh, okay. So, yes, and we also have counseling available for both individuals. I wanted to just kind of piggyback on something that one of the presenters was saying about both of the individuals involved, because one of the things that Title IX is kind of leaning towards is being more supportive of the person who is responding to the allegations.
Yes.
And that is something that also is afforded to the students of our campus.
I would like to say also, to add to that, at Drake State, our process is similar. The process can be found in the student catalog as well as the student handbook. And I think it's important not just for the person who was assaulted, but any student who sees something that they should say something. And so I think that's where it becomes important to identify the behaviors that have taken place. I've only been at Drake State for a little less than a year, so we haven't had any incidents since I've been here, but at other institutions, I encourage the same behavior. If you see something, if you know of something, say something. Whether you're a student, whether you are a faculty or staff member, who's obligated to say something, I encourage students to do so as well. And make sure that you are aware of the process and who are those persons. I also serve as Title IX coordinator here at Drake State. And so students should know who they go to provide that information to, and to know that these are safe zones. It's safe spaces for you to be able to confide that information to where it won't be known all across campus. So I think that's another key component that students should be aware of. All of our processes are somewhat similar. If we don't offer or have the services available, we do refer you to organizations within the community to build that partnership. So I think that's important. Also, I think it's important for students, if you have been assaulted, that you must process the experience. You must kind of deal with it in order to be able to move on. Although it may be a traumatic experience, recognize that you are not in it alone and that there are other people who are there to support you through that process on each of our campuses. And so I think that's important to
Yes.
understand as well.
Okay. Yes. Thank you. Thank you all for your responses. Okay, another question. How would you address if a victim, victims are afraid of retaliation because they claim to be sexually assaulted by a person who has an authoritative position. So if someone were to come to any of the offices and they were to tell you that they were sexually assaulted by a teacher or maybe the president or anyone, a higher official, and they're afraid of retaliation, maybe something that might happen to them, and or maybe it's someone who's even in their classroom and nothing has been done. How do you address those situations?
Well, on our campus, and I'm sure with all the other campuses, because one of the processes is that if there is an immediate threat or possible danger for the person who's reporting, that there is some interim measures that can be taken. And one of those, for instance, if the person is in your class, we could reassign that person to another class, have them do their class remotely. But with a person in authority, we have suspended individuals from work for the period of time that the case is being handled until things can be resolved. There's even been situations where the person has been let go from the university. But certainly, and I think I can probably speak for all of the other campuses, that is something, if it's a person in authority, if there is some imminent threat of danger, that person
You can read it again. Yes.
would definitely be either removed from the campus, suspended from their employment, and things of that nature would definitely be put in place.
I would agree with those same sentiments. I've been in similar situations, just as you have expressed, but I think it's important for the person to have the courage to say something, because otherwise we can't take those interim measures unless we are notified of the retaliation or the retaliatory behavior.
I agree with what both of the women just said.
Yes, it does.
I also think,
Okay, if there are, I'm sorry, go ahead.
oh, it's okay. I also think it's important that that we have those ways for people to reach out on campuses, but also sometimes they're scared to reach out, at work or at school, or so just, having the ability to be able to speak to maybe somebody that's not at school, like, with crisis services, we work closely with the college campuses. Just to make sure they have other outlets. Not every survivor wants to go through the whole process of everything, and making sure that they know that's okay, that when they're ready, they can do it, and that we're there for them each step of the way. And I think that's important because not everybody feels comfortable even filing a report,
Okay, thank you so much for your responses. We have another really good question, and the audience would like to know, what can we do about institutions that protect offenders from civil or criminal acts by coercing or discouraging victims from coming forward? And I know in different institutions, especially smaller ones, we consider each other family. And sometimes when, family make mistakes, you kind of want to cover up for them or, try to find a way out of the hole. So how do we go about, I guess, institutions that do protect maybe their family or just offenders by coercing or discouraging victims?
That's a really good question. Just having the courage to be able to tell your story is major. And as Crisis Services stated, if you feel that, okay, if I go this route at my university, then they're going to sweep it up under the rug. You have outside agencies such as Crisis Services that you can go and receive the care that you need. You can always get the law involved. Always document your attempts to try to get the issues resolved. If you've gone to someone on your campus and it's swept up under the rug, it's very important to document those attempts, because we're dealing with Title IX. Mm-hmm. If you all, I encourage every single student when we log off today to just go and read up on what Title IX actually is. It's a federal law. And I know a lot of you all may have heard about the cases at Penn State. Individuals can get into a lot of trouble if they neglect to report. There's stories out there about those cases that became public at Penn State, where there were individuals trying to protect those in authority positions, and it didn't turn out well for those individuals. So I would just say, don't give up hope. Don't feel like you are in the wrong for doing what is right, but you do have other ways you could get the information out there to tell your story if your university, tries to turn the blind eye regarding that.
Yeah, I would agree with everything that Tanisha is saying. In addition, I wanted to just stress the option that any individual has to go outside of the university or the college to address what has happened to them. What we need to keep in mind also is that Title IX is not a criminal process. The criminal side of whatever has occurred is definitely something that law enforcement needs to take care of. And so a lot of times people, individuals feel like Title IX it's supposed to be something that will cause a person to go to jail or things like that. But that is not what it is about. It's about resolving, preventing individuals from being affected in their educational experience. And so I would definitely, and I always encourage individuals, to make sure that they follow the policy, read the policy, understand it, and always know that you have outside options if you don't feel like your concerns or whatever has happened to you is not being taken seriously. And also what Tanisha is saying about documentation, it is absolutely important, because that is something that holds a tremendous amount of influence in situations such as this.
And if I can just jump in here for a second, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So
yes.
I'm Sergeant Wright with the Huntsville Police. I'm Sergeant Wright with the Huntsville Police Department, and I am the supervisor for the Special Victims Unit. One thing that I would like to add to everything that we're talking about right now is that you, as a victim, you as a survivor, do not have any obligation to follow the whims, to follow the urgings, the unks of an outside entity, be it the school, be it people who would try to persuade you not to go to law enforcement, anything of that nature. That is your absolute right. So in trying to look out for your physical safety, your emotional safety, things of that nature, you have absolutely the right, even if you don't want to go to the school to report that you have been victimized, you can go directly to law enforcement, because law enforcement that is our aim, that is our mission, to make sure that you are safe and to make sure that you are advocated for. So if anyone, just as the young lady spoke about before, if anyone such as Penn State in that situation is trying to persuade you not to go to law enforcement, or to persuade you to do something outside of what you want to do to keep yourself safe, that should be in and of itself a red flag, because that tells you that they probably have some sort of maybe a fiduciary interest in it. Maybe they're looking at their students as numbers instead of people, and that's totally something that is not in your best interest. What should be of your best interest is yourself, your safety, and your security. So I would urge you, if you are victimized, go directly to law enforcement, and we can assist in getting you to those different services that can help you along the way by. But no matter what, make sure that you always report it.
I just wanted to add as well is that it's important that you reach out to services. Don't go to the hospital. I know in the COVID situation, nobody really wants to go to the hospital anyway, but 24/7, 365 days a year, crisis services is open, and you can make contact through law enforcement, through our crisis line, and seek services 24/7 without taking one step inside the hospital. Now, if you need suturing and you've got a lot of physical injuries, then you would have to go to the hospital. But most of the time, we can deal with everything that needs to be dealt with at crisis services without you stepping foot in the hospital. So.
Okay. Okay. Thank you all for your questions. We are running out of time. We only have a couple of questions left. And the next one will be, what are the proposed changes to Title IX and how do they affect students? And I'll repeat it. It's what are the proposed changes to Title IX and how do they affect students?
I saw it, Tanisha, but some of the proposed changes, which we are anxiously awaiting, we believe that they're going to be coming out any moment, maybe even today. But this has been a really long process and waiting for those changes. But one of the things, as I kind of stated before, that the Department of Education is interested in is institutions being fair. And because there are some institutions under the current regulations that do not have hearing panels. I know that there are institutions out there who only have one person who makes that decision regarding cases. And it usually, sometimes it's the president, sometimes it's some other individual that's been designated. So hearing panels is something that the new regulations is going to definitely stress. And I believe personally that the reason that that's going to be stressed is because of the fact that institutions are not taking a balanced look at what's been happening to their students. One of the things that could come with the changes is during the hearing is for both parties to be able to have legal counsel in the hearing with them, and that legal counsel may be able to ask questions to either of the parties. So that's something that is possible with the new regulations. I don't know if anybody else has, but that's one of the things that is really, really huge, because we as Title IX coordinators and administrators believe that can be a challenge for our processes to bring in legal counsel into hearings. And so, yeah, so that one's that sticks out to me. Tanisha, I don't know if
you covered it wonderful. And just to piggyback off of what you just stated, putting my counselor hat on right now, it kind of disturbs me because of the fact, well, of course, you want to be fair across the board. Let me make that crystal clear. I don't want it to seem like we're taking sides for either party. But as a counselor, just understanding what PTSD does to an individual, that is a major concern of mine. And just making sure that, because as Adrian just spoke about, every university may not be equipped. We have 4 licensed counselors on our campus to be able to provide services for those students to come in and actually speak with a professional. Not every university or college is set up that way. And they may not have, if they're in a rural town, they may not have access to places like crisis services where they can go in and speak to a professional. So it's just the risk and possible intimidation of survivors just coming forward to make their report.
And I will jump in on this because I want to
Okay.
add.
Thank you. Oh,
Sorry, Ashley. I think we got a little bit of
go
a
ahead.
lag.
I'm sorry for the lag.
I wanted to add that the changes have not been published yet from the Department of Education, but there's word through the grapevine that those changes will be released sooner rather than later. They were going through the process of reading through all the public comments that were submitted. And I want to say there were upwards of 135,000 comments that were submitted to address the proposed changes. So I would just encourage everyone to be on the lookout for those changes. They could potentially have some serious effects on both respondents and complainants as far as the Title IX process goes. So really, as far as students and faculty go at universities, you guys do need to be very well aware of those changes. And thank you, Ashley, for your moderation and letting me jump in there.
Of course. Very, very last. I know we are out of time. We are stretching it. But very last question. I'm going to word it as best as I can. I know we're in the South and we are in the Bible Belt, and we have faith-based institutions and, just a lot of believers within the Huntsville and Madison community. So when it comes to like these faith-based institutions and churches, when sexual assault takes place in a church, what should the church do? And also, I know that in the African American community, we tend to take major traumatic events like this and push them under the rug or state that they're only family affairs. I also kind of want to ask, along with the church question, does culture affect, I guess, the way assault is like handled? So overall, the question would be, when sexual assault takes place in the church, what should the church do? And how does culture play a part of that?
I mean, I can't speak for every church and what their rules and their guidelines are, but in the way I look at it and working with survivors for the last couple of years, if something happens within the church, we need to make sure that there are people there to surround that survivor with the support they need. And especially it's hard if they feel it's happened or it has happened, or the people that kind of run the church are involved closely with that situation. It can make them feel more isolated, even in their church, and a church is where most people go for comfort. So it's important that they even have groups of people within their church that handle this kind of situation, and let them know the resources that are out there. Let them know that we have to separate maybe how we feel for the offender and how we feel for the victim, and make sure we're doing the right thing, and that these people our victims are being taken care of, and not to sweep it under the rug. I think it's important that we talk to our churches, and not just to our government groups and our nonprofits and our schools. It has to include everything, including faith-based, that we're all on the same page to help protect a victim and let them know that there's people they can turn to even within their church. I mean, that's where I'm at on that, the faith-based side of things.
Yeah, I would add to what Jolene is saying, that I know that in our denomination, in the Seventh-day Adventist, that there is a process where individuals are required, especially when they work with children, to take training to be able to work with children, because there are a lot of molestation and things that happen with children And also, I would advise that if there isn't like a social work team in your church, because these individuals who are on the social work teams or even your health ministry teams, they have the ability to and the responsibility to protect as well in their professions. So I would say, number one, if you are feeling or if you know of someone who has gone through that, and because the church is such a tightly knit, as you say, Ashley, family kind of setting, that individuals like social workers or psychologists or your health team, even most churches nowadays have nurses that are always on duty in their churches. I would say that definitely those individuals who have the professional responsibility to report or to advocate on behalf of those who are in positions of harm, that they would be the first point of contact. And then as far as culture is concerned, I think culture does play a big role because individuals tend to put culture sometimes above their responsibilities. So it can be sometimes a barrier for individuals to break through that. But again, I think that as much as possible to appeal to someone who can advocate for you and be objective and impartial to help and assist with breaking through those cultural barriers that definitely do exist in churches.
May I jump in for a minute? This is David Person.
Really fast.
May I jump in for a minute? This is David Person.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I along with Helen Fishel and Halbrook Polite and Choya Wise are part of a ministry. We all are part of a ministry at the Oakwood University University Church called Restore, and it is a domestic violence, abuse, and prevention ministry. And I wanted to say that it seems to me like churches have a real obligation, perhaps more than any institution in our society, especially in the Black community, to address this issue as a major component of what that church does. And I'm saying this because we know that, first of all, churches are populated predominantly by women. That's point number one. Point number two, we know that that a sizable percentage of women, whether they're in the church or outside of the church, are being directly affected by sexual assault, sexual abuse, domestic violence, etc. And then we also know that with children, a lot of children are facing these challenges also in the context of homes where church or Christian belief is a part of that. So, I would just like to say that I think churches have to make this a I think all churches should make it a prominent part of their ministry, as much as anything else that they do, preaching, on the weekends, singing, whatever else they do.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. David. And just want to say thank you to all the panelists. I know we have over-exceeded our time, but these were really good questions, really good responses, and we just thank you all for participating. If you have any other questions or whatnot, you can email them to the panelists or even to the organizer, Miss Addie Wagner. And this is the end of this segment. Just going to give it back over to Miss Addie, and thank you all for your participation.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Ashley.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. At this time, we're going to quickly go into, and again, we want to say thank you very much, panelists. This was terrific information. Thank you, Ashley, for a job well done, right? And we appreciate you, and we appreciate our panelists, right? At this time, we're going to quickly turn it over to DJ is a student at Alabama A&M University. She's a senior social work student, graduating senior, and she is going to be the person that is going to introduce our next presenters. So DJ, if you would turn on your mic and let's hear from you.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. I have Holbrook Polite Jr. Holbrook Polite Jr. is a founder of Alternative Strategies. Strategies is a conflict resolution firm started in Atlanta, Georgia in September 2009. He gains great satisfaction from seeing his clients make amazing transformation in handling conflicts in their personal and professional lives. He sees himself as a teacher and purveyor of hope. Mr. Polite is a bridge builder. At Aspire Counseling and Consulting, Holbrook works as a behavioral interventionist. He focuses on assisting clients with anger management, domestic violence intervention, and parenting skills. Holbrook holds a Master of Arts degree in sociology from Georgia State University. He is certified by the Georgia Commission on Family Violence as an interventionist. I'm sorry. And I have pretty much a master's and degree in sociology. Okay. Are we okay? And I have Toya Wise. Toya Reginald Wise is a licensed clinical social worker with over 20 years experience in mental health. Over these years, he has thrived in helping clients believe in themselves and harness their capability to make life and relationships happen. Choya is a dedicated professional currently running a successful private practice. He brings a robust and diverse work experience to a social work as a social work contractor, medical social worker in nursing homes, hospitals, and homes. In addition to his years of working in multiple facets of his field, he is currently working as a clinical therapist, specializing in anger management and relationship. Mr. Wise is a graduate of Ohio State University with a master's degree in social work.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. So we should be hearing from Mr. Polite and Mr. Wise. You are now on.
Oh.
If you would just bear with them for a moment, they are just setting up, okay? Just so everybody can know, you have to take the system and turn it over to the next person, and we can't preset things using this particular format. And while we have a break in the action, as you listen to this presentation, if you'd be so kind as to direct your questions from this to me, George Ashley, in the private chat box. And so when we have the Q&A time, I can share those questions with the group. Thank you. Go ahead, guys.
All right. I'm sorry, I got kicked out. Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. Hopefully no more switches. Is Holbrook in? Holbrook's not in. Yeah, every time there's a switch.
Now I made Holbrook the presenter.
I'm in.
Okay.
I'm in.
Okay, go ahead, man.
All right, thank you, sir. All right, hopefully we're beyond the technical difficulties. Thank you, Addie and George and everyone involved for inviting us. I appreciated the previous discussion. It was rich and definitely there's some resonance that I found between addressing challenges and concerns for victims of domestic violence and sexual assault, and from the perpetrator side. Actually, there's certain things that you said that made sense to me. For example, when men come in and tell their story, they want to be heard. Regardless of how wrong I might think they are, I have to hear their story. and then help them navigate from being a man trapped in what we call the man box or in patriarchy to a man that's looking for equity in his relationships. A couple quick things that I wanted to throw out, just something you to think about. I heard an NPR podcast 2 years ago. It was February 18th, and it was called Boys Are Broken. And it's by Michael Ian Black. So I want folks to check that out because it talked about toxic masculinity and how that plays out in adolescence. And those folks become teenagers, college students, and men. So Boys Are Broken. And as I was listening to the panelists and I was thinking about this presentation, I realized that boys are broken. And what I wanted to say is that men in our culture, generally speaking, don't have respect for women. And that causes a lot of the issues that we're talking about today. I was working with a client a week ago, and he said to me, Kay Ivey shouldn't be governor. And he's a staunch Republican. And he said simply because she's a woman. And this is a person that considers himself an evangelical Christian, but he doesn't think a woman should be in high office. So this is something that's ingrained in our culture. In the 70s, and I'm dating myself here, growing up, and some of the panelists may remember this show, All in the Family. Archie Bunker, he was a classic, a lot of the isms apply to him, a classic misogynist, a classic sexist, classic racist. But this is someone who was trapped in this box of patriarchy. And simply, he was the king of the castle and his wife was just part of his court. And there was no equity there. In fact, just a quick personal story. My dad was a lot like Archie Bunker. He had a recliner. And if he was not at home and I was in that recliner and I heard his car, I got out of that recliner very quickly. If a guest was in that recliner when he came home, he stood next to that recliner until they got up. So patriarchy is about power and control. And that's what we're really talking about when we talk about domestic violence, when we talk about sexual assault. It's not about sex, it's about power and control. Let's see. Can everyone see my screen? Because it keeps saying screen share is paused.
I can't see it, but you know, I've been kind of teched out today.
Okay, hold on a second. Try it again. Can you see my screen now?
No.
Okay.
At the top of your screen, there should be an orange button that says pause. Maybe go to that.
I see a button that says resume sharing, but it's not.
Yes, hit that.
Okay.
Would you like me to
Sure,
pull
you
it
can.
up and I can click down
Yeah,
for you?
that would be helpful. Yeah, because it's not working for me.
Technical difficulties.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They
Yeah,
happen.
we can see him, but we can't see his.
Okay. You will give me just a moment. I will get that pulled up, and if you just you can tell me next, and I'll scroll. Okay.
Sure.
Okay.
Holbrook, you may need to just go on with what you can speak on, because I know we've got other presenters, and
Sure.
people have, you know, may have to get back out for lunch or something.
I'm having trouble finding it. I'm sorry. I downloaded it and had it up. I wish I knew how to pull up those graphics like they had at intermission in the movies. The dancing popcorn and such.
I'll go ahead and start moving through.
Yes, please do. I'm having technical difficulties on getting the program to pull up.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, our main goal is to help men move towards partnership, which is equity in relationships. And based on long ingrained ideas, if you think about it, up until the late 19th century, women and children were the property of their husband. So when you think about patriarchy, it's been a part of our lives for a very long time. Okay, you got the presentation?
Yes.
All right. Okay, you can move on to the next slide. Go to the third slide. Okay, you can keep going. Go on to the next one. The real cost of patriarchy is the fact that domestic violence occurs in 1 out of 4 households. And 1 out of 4 women report during their lifetime they will be a victim of domestic violence. Actually, about 10 million households annually actually report that they experience some type of domestic violence. And lastly, 10% of women report being raped by their intimate partner. And for the longest time, men believed that they could not rape their wife or their girlfriend, but legislation kind of caught up with this idea of equity and women's rights, and rightfully so. Intimate partner violence and rape is a real thing. You can move to the next slide, please. Okay. Men are often trapped in a box, and it was interesting. Someone said that the women, I think it was Julie, said that the women are put on a leash. And the women are put on a leash simply because a lot of men are trapped in this box of patriarchy. And it's been euphemistically called the man box after work that was done in the 80s and 90s. And what the man box really is the collective socialization of men that boxes them into a certain type of behavior that they often do consciously and sometimes unconsciously. And some of the things you'll see is acting powerful and dominating, acting fearless and in control all the time. They're strong and stoic. And then men want to be successful in the boardroom, the bedroom, and on the ball field. So this idea of patriarchy is also called being stuck inside the man box. Okay, next slide, please. Addie, you can advance to the next slide. All right. This slide is a little bit hard to read, but I'll just briefly say that in the 80s, Paul Gavot and his partners at the Oakland Men's Project came up with this concept. He actually wrote a book called Men's Work, How to Stop the Violence That Tears Our Lives Apart, because obviously domestic violence, domestic assault not only affects the victim, the direct victim, but also the children in the family and also the perpetrator himself. This work has been advanced by Tony Porter. He actually founded an organization called Call to Men. I've done some work with him. And over the last 10 years, actually in 2010, he presented a TED Talk that's actually been viewed over 500,000 times. And I want to share a little bit of that with you to give you some more foundation in this idea of patriarchy described as the man box. So I'll move to the next slide, and there's about a 5-minute video that talks about the man box. You can't, it won't give you the link. That's okay.
No, I
We'll just move.
apologize.
Oh, no, it's not your fault. Okay, you can move to the next slide. You can advance to the, okay. So within the man box, there are 7 main pillars. One is self-sufficiency, and that basically says that men can get through their problems without any support or help from anyone. Acting tough, so men have to be strong, and if there's a conflict, they should be willing to fight. And I remember a friend of mine telling me that when his mother died at 8, he was told he was the man of the house. So very early on, we give this messaging to young men that they have to be tough and stoic. Physically attractive, meaning that you should look good at all times, but not too attractive to be perceived as being feminine. Rigid gender roles. Even in today's climate, some men don't want to do laundry or do any housework, and that causes conflict within the home. Hypersexuality and homophobia. Basically, real men are heterosexual and not gay. That's one of the pillars. Hypersexuality, meaning that men should always be on the prowl looking for sex. And last, this idea that aggression and control makes you a real man. And as we alluded to previously, this will lead to domestic violence potentially, and also to sexual assault. You can go to the next slide. Okay. So in response to domestic violence throughout the country, there's something called a coordinated community response. This involves collaboration between domestic violence educators like myself, advocates, law enforcement, and the judicial system. And through this process, the goal is to give these men some type of redemption, but also help them be integrated back into their family in a way that's more equitable. And then that's what I've been doing for the past 10 years. And then also helping men develop healthy support systems. So something that goes well beyond the criminal justice system and the boundaries that have been put on them by the system. There are support groups that help men realize that living in partnership and equity is not only healthy for their wife and their intimate partners, but healthy for themselves. If you go to the next slide. Addie, you can forward to the next slide.
It's lagging.
It's
there we go.
No problem. Okay. So the things we look for on an individual basis with the men, and to be honest with you, in Atlanta and even here, as men go through this process, this notion of desire to change takes quite a while for the average man. It may take 50% of the classes, whether it be 24 classes or 16. It usually takes 12 to 9 classes before men actually experience this idea that maybe there's a better way of living to deal with their conflict, but also their insecurities. So what we do, it's called psychoeducational, and it's geared towards behavior modification, but also at the same time, there's a strong piece of psychology in what we do, even though it's not called counseling. We do it inside of groups, and this group is a support group, but also a process group. We help the men build self-awareness so that they can understand how they show up emotionally impacts everyone in the family. We help them develop empathy. And I think someone mentioned that earlier in the previous presentation. And that's one of the keys to actually men making this transformation from aggression and dealing with conflict through aggression and moving to empathy, which allows them to understand their partner in a way that allows them to appreciate and respect them. And as I said up front, generally speaking, men do not, in our society, do not respect women. And then the last piece is this idea that men need to be present both in their relationships with their partners, but also with their children, and even people that they encounter at work in general. Men can often be present physically, but not be present emotionally and spiritually, and that causes conflict. And that also causes some of the things that we've talked about today. At this point, I'm going to transition the presentation over to Troya so he can talk more about what he sees in his individual practice outside of the group process and give you a sense of some of the things he does to help men navigate out of the man box.
Okay, definitely. Thank you, Hallbrook. And so I may sound like I'm moving a little bit fast because we're kind of short for time, but what I actually be sharing is some of the approaches. It'll be a little bit different. A lot of times when we're working with the women, because we talked a little bit about the men, but what about the women? What are the women to do that experience domestic violence or that are at risk for domestic violence? Taking a look at that, and a lot of the approaches sometimes, that we look at, which are very good, is what resources and things like that are available. But I want to talk a little bit about how, like Hallbrook said, how I work with things from the individual level, one-on-one with women. I want you, if you can, it's so much that we can cover as far as domestic violence. It's so many different aspects of it. But today, what I would like to do is approach it from the perspective of a woman, maybe a younger woman, because we have a lot of college students, and she says to us, I'm finding myself in relationships with men who are abusers. And this could be really emotional abuse or physical abuse, because this is where it all starts. A lot of times it starts with emotional abuse and moves to physical. Sometimes it just starts right away with the physical abuse. But in this, she's saying, what is going on? Why is this happening to me? And how do I get out? So I want you to view things as I run through the perspective of, say that this is your daughter, say this is your sister, say this is your friend, and we're wanting to know how we can help this person. And so we're looking at individual perspective. Addie, if you can go to the next slide, the slide that says we have to know how we got into it. Okay, and so many of us are primed in our childhood to be in a relationship with an abuser. That may sound strange. So if, say for instance, if you have had a parent that you can identify that significantly contributed to overwhelming feelings of you feeling, Yana Benzan, and I've heard other authors often speak about the uns: unattractive, unlovable, unloved, unaccepted, unimportant, well, I got unattractive on there. So unworthy should have been the last one. The individuals that fall into this category will often have a high probability of experiencing abusive relationships. And the question is how so? It doesn't mean in this situation, are we saying my parents are bad? No, it doesn't mean that your parents were bad. It doesn't even mean that they were abusive. It doesn't mean that they were evil. It's just that it happens that way. And sometimes we don't even know it until we process this. And this is what we deal a lot with in therapy, is processing how we got to this point. I'm going to see if I can 1-minute clip by Harville Hendricks that kind of breaks this process down a little bit. I hope you all be able to hear this. You can't
when you
echo it out.
become an adult and you go on your search and find mission, the falling in love experience, you see somebody across the room and you move toward them like a moth to the flame, and you feel all these wonderful things called romantic love, and they are your dream person. You do not know that there's a program running out of your awareness in the background that's matching you with somebody similar to the caretakers with whom you grew up, and matching you particularly with a person with whom you will experience the worst frustrations, not the best experiences that you had with your caretakers. And so then, while they look like the person of your dreams, they will become the person of your nightmares. And that leads then into the power struggle. And that's when couples come to therapy.
Okay. So this doesn't just happen with reality is that men experience abuse as well. And so we don't want to leave the men out, but the majority of the situations of assault happen to women. And you can go to the next slide, Addie. I'm sorry. And so if there was a movie that just came, the next one after that, We Are Attracted to What Is Familiar. I'm sorry. There is a movie that just came out with the Clark sisters, and it seemed like the main actor primarily was Maddie Moss Clark. And if you look at the story, it's a really compelling story of these famous gospel singers who were able to really have a lot of success in the gospel arena. They were directed by Miss Maddie Moss Clark, at least according to the movie at the time. Miss Maddie Clark's tactic of working with her girls, getting them up in the middle of the night, 5-hour practices, things like that, were kind of like Joe Jackson like. And interesting enough, her husband was a physical abuser. So here you have a two-part situation where you have a narcissistic mother whose ideas is for success are primarily motivated by her own wanting to desires to be successful. So much to the point that at one time Twinkie, who was her daughter, a very talented woman, said, "I can't tell the difference between your voice and God." Often, and we could go to the next slide. Often, this is something that when we're in domestic violence situations, that you may hear from a woman who has experienced domestic violence. Especially, I see it from a lot of situations with spiritual women, God-fearing women, because they trust in that man. They yield to him, ask if he were God, but then don't necessarily seek God themselves. So what I'm saying is how this relates to the situation when we're talking about just with Harville Hendricks. He's a best-selling author, and he's basically, what he's saying is that based on who you have been exposed to, your parents, there's a strong likelihood that if a parent has made you feel unworthy, unloved, or unlovable, you will likely be attracted to someone who also has those characteristics. And a lot of times the question is, why does this happen? And I can't really explain it. It's like a psychological phenomenon. It's something that I come into in practice. I see on a regular basis. But this is and a lot of times this kind of thing has to be processed in therapy because it's unconscious. We don't actually know that we're doing it. Many times for those of you who aren't so young, if you track back your relationships, you will find a trend in the type of person that you may attract. Okay, so now we don't want to make the woman the weak vessel and that she can't choose right. This is not what we're saying. Men do it as well. I did it. I remember I was, back in the day, I used to attract women who were cutthroat. And I was in a relationship with a woman one time, and she said that I am a button pusher. This was her claim, is that I'm a button pusher. And what part of that doesn't say get out? You know what I'm saying? What part of somebody tells you that they're a button pusher, what part of that doesn't tell you to get out? But when you have certain things going on here that need to be developed, as I did, it's not that simple. And that's a lot of times when we're not understanding when there has been abuse in certain situations. So it's not so easy to just remove yourself from the relationship, because here lies an emotional need. If I have been beat down to make to feel why I'm unworthy, unloved, unlovable, guess what? If this person goes, then in my mind, I may feel, even though they're physically abusive, that's just a symptom. Someone who receives physical abuse is just a symptom. It's not the full story. And so a lot of times in practice, what I do see is that the women, when I'm seeing women who are in abuse, these are not weak women. They're very strong women. Probably half of them have written their husband's dissertations. Half of them have started their husband's business. They are very strong, successful women. You wouldn't see an ounce of weakness if you knew it. If you knew anything, unless you knew something about it, then you might suspect. But you just looking at these individuals, you will never see weakness because they're not weak. Just like in the situation I said, I didn't consider myself to be weak because I was with a button pusher. But because there were certain things that needed to be worked out in me, then that became an issue. Okay. And again, I'm just focusing on the situation where we have a young woman, she's perpetually in relationship with and saying, how do I find myself out of this? Okay, we got to move. Reasons why we get stuck. If you can move to that slide, Addie. So what it just happens to be that many times abusers are narcissists. Narcissists want what they want when they want it. They don't have empathy and they have high demands. Narcissists, they kind of just try to take things into their own hands, and narcissists work well with being praised. The biggest thing that repels a narcissist is when you lose interest. So if at any time, a lot of time when a woman may experience abuse from a predator, it may be because he fears some lack of or fears the possibility of some level of separation. And so that can in itself can bring on the abuse. And so the woman who's receiving abuse sometimes will stay in the relationship. When the abuse comes along, she's not fully aware of the pattern of this. And what the question I want you to think about is what keeps her in the relationship. See, a lot of times the mechanisms that we have in place are geared towards once the abuse happens. But once we clean up the situation, get the woman or man out of the situation, what happens next? And see, that's a lot of what's not talked about. What happens next? Usually this is perpetual until I understand deeper about myself. It's not the woman's fault. We are attracted to what the majority of situations that I deal with relationship counseling and anger management. And the majority of the situations that I'm dealing with spouse are they're working out issues that they maintain from caregivers through their spouse, who is just like the caregiver. It's something that until they get into counseling, they don't ever really recognize. And then they're like, wow. And then they laugh and joke many times when we get things calmed down. It's like, that's why I always say you just like my daddy or like my mom. Not in domestic violence situations, but So the in closing, and I had a lot more to say, but we've got to. I want to honor the other presenters. If we can go to the last slide, renewed thoughts about self must occur. Again, this is a little bit different. We're not saying that it's the woman's fault or the man's fault, whoever ends up being the one that's being abused. Because believe me, I got some guys that get beat up. So that's not just a one-sided thing. And it's not a joke. It's serious. But it's something here that we have to and once that is changed, guess what? And this is what happens in therapy for me. When a woman who is being abused, and we're working with her, the things that we focus on is empowerment. We focus on one of the presenters said it earlier, the self-esteem thing, because usually the control, and if I can beat you down emotionally, if I can cut off all your supply of resources as far as your friends, loved ones, daddy, mama, then it's just me. And then once I built you up, then I can just take you down. That's the psychological thing. Because remember, the question that I asked before is what keeps the woman that is being physically abused or the man in the relationship. Sometimes this is what is keeping in the relationship is that I've got these uns. What am I going to do when this relationship ends? Am I going to will someone else be attracted to me? Will someone else love me? Will they accept me? Am I worthy enough to move on? So some of the things that we got to correct. Last page. Okay. Undo the uns. We have to undo the uns. We have to deal with our past. A lot of times, I find out in a lot of situations when there is some abuse, if you ever thought for one moment that your father that you don't know or that you do know, who is not active in your life, especially if it's been since a child, that doesn't affect you, you need to come to a session. You need to come. How do you deal with rejection? You see what I'm saying? How do you deal with abandonment? These are questions. And these are questions that we have for our sisters, our daughters, us as individuals, men as well. We can't lean on others for validation. One of the masterful plans of the predator, the narcissist, the domestic abuser is they get in the mind and they validate you. All validation has to come from that person. And so when they're not giving it, what are they doing? If they're not validating you, then they're beating you down. And that's the cycle. Then they build you back up, they beat you down. When I'm not relying on you for validation because of something that's in here, because I don't have uns, that no longer has a hold. Refuse to let your hurt be an attraction. Don't keep hope alive. One of the primary things that we often see is that glimmer of hope that is held by a person who is in emotional or physical abuse. Always, many times we'll have hope that, again, this is the woman that's saying, I'm trying to get out of this cycle. This is her. This is not everybody. I hope and expect, just like I hope that daddy would someday come home and see me. I hope that he would recognize me. I hope they maintain often that hope in the relationship that partner will show up as they did the first day that they met him. Okay. And so we can't keep hope alive. We got to cancel out hope. We got to redefine what hope really means. And lastly, if safety is a concern, I think our panel covered a lot of the resources that are out. Definitely get help. If it's a dangerous situation that you have to, somebody's being physically abusive with you right now, please take the advice of the panelists, use these resources, and try your best to get into a safe situation. The main thing is the renewing of the mind, and that's a repellent to the predator. They are not attracted to that renewing of the mind because it relinquishes any control that they have. Thank you.
Okay. Somebody have a fun.
I didn't know if I was just talking to myself because I didn't see nobody.
You're not. You're not.
The whole thing by myself, boy.
No, you're not. This is great information, right? We do have a couple things to say. First of all, the folks are asking, this is great information. Would you be willing to make your slides available? So others can review the slides?
Absolutely.
Okay, that's great. So folks, they are going to make their slides available for you, right? We do have a few questions we'd like to ask you guys, and we realize that we're limited in time, right? But there's some good questions that people have put out here. So here's the first question for you, right? How do we help men to find a balance between understanding what the, quote, man box is and using it as an excuse for toxic behavior? So once again, how do we help men find the balance between understanding what the, quote, man box is and using it as an excuse for their toxic behavior?
I'm being a little tongue in cheek, but 99% of what they saw growing up, forget about it. And I say that because, the men that I was exposed to, my father, my uncles, they were in the man box, and there was a lot of toxic masculinity. And for me, and this is kind of ironic, one of the slides had the Huxtable family on it. And I actually watched that show, and I watched that character, Heathcliff Huxtable, and I said, if someone conceived this idea of manhood, maybe it's real. And I started the process of actually going to therapy at 19 and just unlearning a lot of the things that I had learned. And it's made a significant difference in my life. And even points along the way, there's this reversion back to the man box. And so I make a practice of going to therapy just like I would get my oil change on a regular basis. In addition to that, just someone mentioned the accountability partner. For the women, I have an accountability partner for myself, so that certain things that I might think are certain ways of dealing with conflict in relationship, I find a positive way to do that. And I've been that person for my brother-in-law and other people. I'll turn it over to Troya.
Go ahead, Troya.
Oh, no, I agree with Holbrook was saying. I like that man box concept. He brought that to the table with Tony Porter. And a lot of it is just, it's rooted in insecurity. You know, we don't know it because, you know, we don't recognize it as insecurity. We recognize it as masculinity. I remember early on in my marriage, you know, I was under the impression as a man in that man box that I'm supposed to make more money than my wife. And so I started having a little anxiety to when she looked like she was about to pass me up. But then I saw one guy, he's married to a dentist and he's, you know, probably making 30, 40,000 himself. And he was just like having a perspective like, man, it's just more in the pot. I was like, wow, man, I never thought of it like that. It is more in the pot, isn't it? You know, but that man thing that you got to be the controller, you got to be the breadwinner, you got to, you know, you got to maintain a certain level of power. That's what we've been trained to believe, and it's all insecurity is what is manifest. Because what if she does make more money than you? What were you afraid that she's gonna be the man of the house now? That's what you're afraid of. So that becomes relevant. Insecurity.
Thank you. Appreciate that. I've got another question, a different sort of question. Somebody on the West Coast is asking you, they're viewing, they want to say thank you very much for their presentation. They've enjoyed watching and listening to what you said. They want to know if you provide services for men, like classes for men remotely, right? And if so, you know, there, in terms of number one, classes for men, and number two, training the actual trainers, right, with the program that you have. And if so, is it possible that you can give them some information where they can connect with you later on, right? That was one of the questions. Do you?
Yeah, I was going to ask
something...
Addie, if you can pull up that updated version of the presentation. There's a slide with our contact information on it.
Awesome.
Okay.
Yes, give me just a moment.
Thank you. All right, and while Addie is pulling that up, I'm just a couple more questions because I realize we have another presentation coming up, right? Just two more questions. One question was, in your work, have you seen men who were abusive towards women actually change, right? And if you could probably describe somebody, the process that you saw that person go through in terms of change.
Oh, perfect question. I was thinking about that question, that very question, as we were preparing for this particular event. So looking at the data and looking at my own experience, if we think about maybe a third of the men change significantly. Another third of the men, they morph. They go from physical abuse to being more emotional abuser. And so that's, you know, that's 2/3. And then that last third, they end up calling me in about 18 months because they have to take the class again. So when I think about one individual in particular that that changed quite a bit, and he changed so much, he started the process of becoming a facilitator. And it was interesting to see his transformation because, again, every man that I've ever interviewed, or at least 90% of them, I didn't do nothing. That's their phrase. I didn't do anything. And then once we allow them to tell their story, there are parts and pieces there that allow them to become more self-aware. Like, this happened in front of my 3-year-old daughter. And then I say to them, so what's she going to glean from that? And initially he says, she gonna be straight. And I was like, really? And then so we talk about the impact of domestic violence on children. And one of the things that really resonates with these men, a lot of times, a large majority of them have witnessed domestic violence. So it creates that empathy, the connection between what they experience and what their child now is experiencing. So because of that resonance, they start to open up. So this one particular man that actually became a facilitator, he got that resonance about class 5, and he realized that basically, you know, he was married to a professional woman and he did whatever he wanted to do, go out of town for days at a time to meet with his mistress. He did whatever he wanted to do. And he realized that as a man, there was no accountability in his life. And he needed to change that because of who he was. I think his father was a Tuskegee Airman. So there was an amount of respect and pride that he had about who he was as an educated Black man. And he was throwing that all away because he was in the man box. So a
Thank you.
third changed significantly.
Yes.
Mhm.
And I will,
Appreciate it. Appreciate it. Go ahead.
yeah, a great deal do change. Generally in my practice, it's not majority of the time initiated by the man. I always make the joke with a lot of women in the practice that majority of men that come to see me is because either they've got a gun to their head, pretty much by their wife or partner that says if you don't go, then you're gone, or they're mandatory ordered by the courts. And so even with that, the primary thing is, those a lot of times are individuals who may have been coerced, but many times they still have a desire to change, and we still are able to see many changes in them. The key is that I feel we get the best results is when a man who is in this situation truly wants to change. I feel it's better done when they are not initiated to come to counseling by the spouse or threat or the courts. However, a lot of times that's not how it works out. So I wouldn't want a woman to be afraid to make that referral and think that it won't be effective because they've kind of been coerced along. But once we get to them, they start to discover much of what has been lying beneath. And there's a reason for the anger, because we don't judge them based on the anger, because I truly believe that anger is just a symptom of the problem. We go down into the layers of what's going on with that individual.
Let me add something. Let me add something to that. With perpetrators of domestic violence and rape, they don't have to be angry. They're just acculturated to have power and control and to be able to, I'm a man in the man box. I'm the king of the world, and I take what I want. And so there's kind of a three-part element to this process. One, ultimatum. I'm going to leave you if you don't change, or they've been mandated by the court. And that there's a lot of resistance in that. And then the second stage is rock bottom. I was a womanizer, and I left the club with 3 women, and I ended up 2 counties over, no clothes, no wallet. They hit rock bottom. So now that's starting that process of maybe I need to change, but they're still somewhat in denial. And then the last part of that 3-part change is epiphany, meaning that it's the right thing to do, and they have this sudden realization that they're on the wrong track. And some men come after the ultimatum, after they've been arrested, they come to class, they're already at epiphany. But far more men come in denial, and they come angry. And again, as he said, anger is just a shield to say that I don't want to be here, I'm not going to change. And then they realize it's an inevitability. They're kind of in quicksand. If they don't change, they're going to lose everything that they ever valued.
Thank you, guys. All right, I appreciate that. We are really just about out of time. I have one last question, right? And then if you could just give us your concluding comments before we turn over to the next presentation. And that question is, you spoke about neuroplasticity, right? In terms of rewiring of the brain, right? Could you share with us how can we rewire using neuroplasticity? More about this particular idea of rewiring our brains in terms of men.
You want to address that? I'll just briefly say that even though our classes are psychoeducational and they're not considered therapy, there is a strong component of therapy happens, and men are able to start, through cognitive behavioral theory, they start to derive pleasure from pro-social behavior. They start to derive pleasure from actually asking a question that speaks to collaboration and cooperation and affirmation in their relationship versus domination. And here's the last thing I'll say is I do this big piece about moving from egocentric behavior to spiritual behavior. And what men find, and what I find is the power comes from them acting in a manner that's more spiritual than aggressive and egocentric. And so they get rewards from that. And again, it reprograms their brains by changing their behavior, and they see the rewards that come with it.
Thank you very much. I appreciate this. Right. I want to say thank you very much to Mr. Polite and also Mr. Wise for their amazing presentation. This was very, very insightful. You saw the contact information. It's on the screen right now. If you'd like to connect with them. Right. And again, we're going to see what we can do in terms of being able to have the slides available for our listening audience. I will tell you about that at the very end of our presentation. So thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate you. Right. We're going to switch over to DJ. DJ is going to once again introduce our speaker for the moment. And while she's introducing the person, we're going to put the slides up at that time. So DJ, are you there?
I am.
All right, DJ, the time is yours.
All right, I have Yalitza LaFontaine, was born in San Juan, Puerto Rico, to a family dedicated to social and religious service. She completed her undergraduate work at MTSU and received her master's from UAH, where she worked as a foreign language instructor for the Intensive Language and Culture Department. LaFontaine was a community organizer for the Alabama Coalition for Immigrant Justice before becoming a director of operations for AshaKiran. Most recently, Ms. LaFontaine was elected to the 2020 Board of Directors for the North Alabama Coalition for the Homeless. Outside of work, she likes spending time with her family, especially her new grandchild. Gardening, tennis, reading, sports, and staying active. She is a tireless social justice advocate who is strongly committed to helping the disenfranchised and improving her community.
Thank you.
Thank you, DJ. Let me, this is an intriguing test. Can everybody see my presentation?
Yes.
Can y'all hear me? Okay, good. Wow, this technology. Wow, thank you so much. It's been really awesome information so far. Thank you for everybody bearing with us through these technically challenging times. My original topic when we were planning this was about the context and culture and the historical stigmatization of women of color with a focus on African American and Latina cisgender women. But as I was preparing to go virtual and as I was thinking about, the questions that were asked earlier, I'm going to focus on some of those cultural barriers that were mentioned and how those can be historical. And we're going to take a very brief look backwards in order to look forward. So as you can see, this is just a conversation starter. We're talking about really complex systematic issues that have a long history, and it's impossible to do in a shortened time span of any kind, much less than 30 minutes or less, and I'm going to keep it brief for the sake of time. Definitely thank you to Holbrook and Choya for talking about the man box and about patriarchy, because that's definitely good information to have as we proceed. So kind of an overview. I'm going to show you a few statistics. We're going to talk about some terms, some terminology, the word rape, a little bit of the history of the word rape, talk about some historical backdrops, archetypes and stereotypes, especially with African American and Latina women, that should say there. I'm going to talk about two brief examples, and then we'll talk about how to shift the narrative, and we'll take some questions and answers. Please remember to direct your questions to George Ashley in the chat box throughout the presentation if you have them. Okay, so if we look at some of the statistics, 80% of rapes are reported by white women. Women of color are more likely to be, although 80% of rapes are reported by white women. women of color are more likely to be assaulted than their white counterparts. As you can see, there's a pretty high percentage of Black women and Hispanic Latina women. Rape is definitely underreported and underprosecuted for a variety of reasons, some that we will get into. One of these cultural barriers would be this idea of self-blame. A lot of cultures have this, the burden that the woman carries in the violent act as a historical way of kind of defining rape, which we'll get into in a moment. Other cultural barriers that prevent women are the biggest barrier, and we'll talk about this when we look at the history, is a distrust of the system. So women of color do not exist in a vacuum. They see how systems fail. They see how the government, the legal system, the media, all of these systems that support the patriarchy kind of come together to make it difficult. So a distrust of the system, whether that's, you know, for the police ignoring a victim, whether that's fear of deportation, whether that's a language barrier that comes into play in reporting. All of these things come together to make this a complicated issue. It's not a simple one at all. So why these numbers, right? Why are women of color less likely to report a rape or an assault of some kind? We're gonna try to talk about that as much as possible, again, with the allotted time, again, with an acknowledgement that these are complicated systems. We're gonna have to talk in generalizations, which is something that we have to do anytime we talk about complicated matters. Every system has exceptions, obviously, and exceptions do occur, but for the sake of conversation, we're going to talk about these sensitive issues in a general fashion. So some terms I want to go through very quickly before we go into our discussion. Culture. We use that word a lot. We talk about for the culture. I talk about my culture constantly. I have a flag right here behind me in my office that's representative of my culture. And so culture is, I'm using the word culture as characteristics and knowledge of a particular group of people, encompassing language, religion, food, social habits, surface culture. Ideology would be under the surface, things like how we react to different social situations, how we behave, things like that. All of these ideas can be associated with culture. Another thing we'll be talking about is collective consciousness. And if you're not familiar with the sociological term, collective consciousness is basically a set of shared beliefs, a set of shared ideas, attitudes, and knowledge that is common within a social group. And again, these are big issues that we're trying to talk about in general terms. So collective consciousness is associated with our collective memory. So a lot of times people tend to be very dismissive of history, right? Oh, that happened a long time ago. We need to get over it. And they're missing the impact that one's system of culture, one's background with history has on a collective belief, an idea of how we deal with things such as violence against women. These are supported by systems of oppression, right? So historically, different governances have had different systems of oppression. And so I'm going to briefly discuss those in terms of African American women and Latina women, specifically here in the US, that view violence and are viewed through the lenses of the systems that we function in. Before moving on, would like to dispel the myth of what is called Latinidad, this idea that all Latinos are the same. different countries have different specific cultures, although we share a lot in common, including a colonizer. Each grouping within the Latino culture has its own variances, which can cause difficulty when we're talking about unity or assigning one label to an entire group of Latinos. So although I'm referring to Latina women as a general group, I wanted to go ahead and acknowledge that there are variances, there are differences, there are political system differences, historical differences for each of the countries represented in Latin America. I have put a little infographic up there that is showing the differences between archetypes and stereotypes. It is a slight difference, okay, and the two in our dialogue might intersect. But when I talk about archetypes, I'm talking about recurring myths, recurring symbols, patterns of behavior that we all talk about, right? Like angel versus harlot kind of thing, kind of archetypes that we discuss in general conversation. Let's talk about the word rape. So there is a really great book called Redefining Rape by Estelle Friedman. And in it, she talks, in her introduction, she goes through defining the word rape. It has evolved in its definition over the centuries. It's, you know, a woman used to be considered, as I think Choya mentioned earlier, property, whether of her father or her husband. So early definitions of rape include property damage, rape seen as damaging the property of a father or a husband. Eventually, it turned into the unlawful and carnal knowledge of a woman by force and against her will. The age of consent during this time, which is problematic, is 10. That's something that is also interesting to look at, how that has evolved over time. But that's a whole nother conversation to have on another day. So this definition then evolves into having the ideas of consent and force attached to it, where in the late 18th century, early 19th century, a lot of prosecutions or the consideration of the incident as serious rested on the character of the accuser and the amount of resistance that she gave forth in the attack. So this is called the earnest resistance clause, which has over time been eliminated from the law, but not from our collective mindset, not from our collective consciousness, which is how a lot of times people will, you know, start asking these questions that come off as victim blaming questions, which we'll talk about in a moment, as a show of this collective idea that we have. Over time, perceptions of rape has changed. I'm going to read you a quote from the book Redefining Rape by Estelle Friedman, where she says, at its core, rape is a legal term that encompasses a malleable and culturally determined perception of an act. Different societies define which non-consensual sexual acts to criminalize, which to condone, and how forcefully to prosecute the former. Indeed, the history of rape consists in large part in tracking the changing narratives that define which women may charge which men with the crime of forceful, unwanted sex, and whose accounts will be believed. The meaning of rape is thus fluid rather than transhistorical or static. So let's talk a little bit about historical backdrop. As I said before, women of color do not live in a vacuum. So there historically has been a lot of tension between what we can call white feminism and feminism of women of color over layers of marginalization. So women historically have been vulnerable. With women of color, there's other layers added to it, whether that's cultural, whether that's race, whether That's religious belief. What kind of culture the person comes from will determine their status. So it's within a historical context that we have to look at the loss of agency of women, especially women of color. Historically, white women, especially in the South, would side more with race than with gender and issues involving women of color. And so that always created sort of a tension. There's a whole lot of studies that explore this tension of within the feminist movement or within the history of women. Excuse me. So British colonialism determined the rape laws here in the United States, especially when they brought over slaves from Africa. Slaves were property and therefore could not testify against their abuser in many ways. So this begins African American women's loss of agency, especially in the early history of the United States, where they were perceived to be property and therefore could be utilized at will. The Spanish colonies, they handled it slightly differently in the beginning. During the Spanish conquest, this church was in charge. And so there's a whole history of laws defined by church standards. There's a long history of abuse by clergy. Latin America has complicated laws as far as what is considered what status. So I guess what I'm trying to say is Spanish colonialism brought about a classism that is not necessarily ingrained in race, even though it's married with race. So for example, you could marry the person in early Spanish history, especially in the colonies. If you were accused of rape, you could marry your victim. And that would, in the eyes of the church and therefore in the eyes of the government, fix that problem. So this is kind of the backdrop. Once there were issues with too many mestizos, too many interracial relationships occurring in the New World, the Spanish government intervened and created laws around status. So it became a matter of what your social status was. We needed to keep a certain status pure in order to perpetuate the European race. So it's complicated. I use the term African American in this presentation because many Latinas are Black, and so we don't view the color dynamic exactly the same, even though it's there and it's very prevalent. Over time, especially in the United States, there have been instances where women, Black women, African American women, have organized in order to lash out or to fight or advocate for themselves. So in the late 1800s, early 1900s, African American women started clubs that would advocate for women. There's a very strong history between the movement to eradicate lynching and a chronicling of sexual assaults, especially in African American women in the South. In fact, Rosa Parks, who we all admire for her stance in the bus boycott, actually in 1944 was assigned by the NAACP the task of investigating a rape case involving Racy Taylor. So as far back as that time, we see that there's chronicling, there's brave women who come out and try to find justice for themselves. However, systematic disenfranchisement makes it so that even if a woman gets her accuser to court, evidence shows that the punishment is disproportionate. So if a white woman accused a Black man, the Black man would get a much, much, much heavier sentence than a white man or a Black woman accusing a white man. So we have these social disparities, okay? We have these systems of oppression, as I called them earlier, that kind of perpetuate the taking away of agency of women of color, especially African-American women and Latina women in the United States. And this system is supported by the media images, stereotypes, archetypes, things that are portrayed, things that are put out, how we perceive, how we see women in our society, especially women who stand up against acts of violence. I believe that it was Ashley earlier that mentioned that culturally, in many cultures, we deal with things by burying them under the rug, I think is what she said. And that's very true for Latino culture as well. There's this sort of idea that we don't talk about these things, we don't cause any problems. There's a lot of culpability involved and a lot of self-guilt involved in trying to address these issues or confront an accuser or stand up against violence against women. There's also been historic usage of women of color's bodies in order to gain research. For example, Margaret Sanger, who is one of the leaders in the contraceptive movement, has a very, very complicated history. And part of her complicated history is supporting research that between 1930s and 1970s, 1/3 of Puerto Rican women were sterilized without their consent in order to promote the support, the contraception, the creation of contraceptions in that movement. Contraception becomes another complicated issue. It can be perceived as, getting agency for my body, right? As a method for me to have some control. But if you grew up in, a heavy Catholic country, then culturally, this becomes something that you have to, it's a conflict that you have to work out. Which system of belief do I adhere to? And so many Latina women have grown up in this environment, this government that's heavily imbued in Catholic ideology. And so there's a lot of kind of maneuvering around that and trying to overcome these stigmas and social norms that have been established years and years, centuries ago. So let's talk about some of the archetypes and stereotypes. For the full presentation, I had planned to explain each and every one of these carefully, but for the sake of time, we'll kind of go through them really quickly. So Latinas and African-American women, we share a lot of these stereotypes. Everybody knows about the fiery Latina, right? This sort of, these boxes that we've been put into. The Mariana is very much a Mexican ideology. It's a contrast to the machismo. It's kind of the standard of what a woman should be. If you're going to be a good wife, you're going to be pure, you're going to be chaste, you're going to serve your husband and maintain the family order. In many ways, the same as the matriarch in African-American archetypes. The most popular one for Latinas is that fiery Latina or the domestic, right? We see in many instances in the media and TV shows, different categories. If you want to explore the idea of the archetype, telenovelas are a great way to look at that, because there's usually, this very attractive, innocent girl, and then there's this, domestic worker, and there's, different archetypes that get played out. Currently, Latina women, I hear a lot of rhetoric around how many children they have, right? And so this is another way in which we are talking about women's agency, kind of in the other side of it. So for centuries, we fight for the right to determine our own bodies, but then women who choose to have multiple children also are deemed or seen as somehow burdening themselves or somehow inferior. Ooh, I'm running out of time. I wanted to talk about 2 examples. I don't know if I'll have time, but I am a Gen Xer, and so in the early 90s, late 80s, we had a lot of social events occur that kind of brought to the forefront a lot of the issues. So you see here Anita Hill, that was 1991. For those of you who do not know, she had to sit in front of a group of white men and talk about sexual harassment at work. And it really created a lot of dialogue. I was in college at the time, and we were consumed by watching the Anita Hill trials and trying to talk about it and seeing how her bravery was being turned into a public dialogue about how we treat women in the workplace, how an African-American woman can stand up for herself and show a professional side. I mean, she was a lawyer after all. And it opened up a community dialogue. And there was a lot of arguing. I remember fighting with people about this. But it was the first time we could really, really talk about it in the public sphere. The other image that I have up there is problematic, also causes a lot of arguments with it. And it was Lorena Bobbitt. She also opened up an intense dialogue because, you know, that trope of the crazy Latina was definitely played as far as her case goes. So we spent more time focused on her craziness rather than the fact that her husband had multiple domestic charges and multiple accusations where the police had come. She also kind of opened up something that Choy and Holbrook had discussed, which is spousal rape. You know, it was illegal by then. However, nobody talked about it. So there was a lot of dialogue around, can your husband rape you? And this agency issue with women that really became central in our community dialogue. I'm going as fast as I can, so I'll be almost done. So there's a lot that we didn't get to talk about, but there are some stigmatizations of behavior that we need to get rid of as a society, and that comes with education, having open discussions like this one and many others. We have a change of perspective that kind of needs to occur. We do a lot of victim blaming. So when someone comes forward and tells us, you know, of an incident, we want to know what they were wearing. We want to know, you know, were you drinking? We want to know where you were. This kind of emphasis on the victim as somehow at fault for what has transpired is historic. You know, for centuries, we've had this idea that if a man commits an act, it must have been that the woman tempted him rather than the man is to blame. And this is supported again over and over historically by the patriarchy, this idea that it's not a man's fault, it's the woman who's this temptress. It's a woman who, you know, her skirt was too short, or she was, you know, somehow to blame for the act of violence. So open discussions lead to changes in perspective. We need to change our public discourse. We need to talk about things a little bit differently. You know, words have meaning and they have connotation and they bring up images. So, you know, instead of calling things domestic violence, for example, which kind of brings about this image of, you know, a heterosexual couple who are married at home, what if we called it intimate partner violence? Right? And then we take that domestic out of it and then see how many more people would fit into that category. Let's stop asking what victims were wearing. Let's stop asking, you know, why they were out at such and such hour. And let's start asking why, you know, perpetrators feel the need to perpetrate. Let's start shifting the blame to that. Advocacy becomes important. You know, Crisis Services has a really great bystander training that talks about this in depth. let's become informed, right? Let's stand up for other people who are in need instead of perpetuating cultural cycles by hiding it. And, you know, we need focused organizations that are focused around the needs of, you know, specific victims, marginalized victims, which is one of the things that we do here at AshaKiran. We try to focus on, you know, those cultural barriers. We try to focus on people who the system kind of overlooks. And so, you know, things like language access, we try to overcome those by training interpreters. As you can see, we have an interpretation training coming up. We try to appease all the barriers around the idea of deportation for people who are foreign born. So organization, we need more organizations that are focused specifically around serving African American women and Latina women in this respect. And we need to start advocating for each other. I went as fast as I could. George.
Thank you very much. Wow. Well, we will give you a virtual clap here. Okay, that's what we normally do at the end, right, of our sessions. Right? And thank you very much. Very, very informative. That's like jam-packed information. But before we go, I know that a number of you guys have asked questions. I can see them here on the chat, but unfortunately, we're not going to be able to respond to all of those questions because of our time. I will take the 2 questions for you, however, right? 2 questions for you. One question is, what role, if any, does music play in the stigmatization of women of color? Whoa, finally got that out. What role does music play in the stigmatization of women of color in today's society?
Dr. Ashley, I knew you were going to ask me that question. Again, it's really complicated, right? We've had this discussion and this tension about, you know, rap. What kind of images is rap perpetuating? The Latino version of that would be, you know, salsa or reggaeton. Reggaeton is kind of our version of rap, and there's a lot of images of, you know, promiscuous women, or, you know, lyrics that talk about a man sort of overcoming a woman. I think, in my opinion, I want to clarify, it's my opinion. I think that the issue isn't necessarily the music. I think that the music is an expression of a broader cultural marker, right? As Choya and Holbrook discussed, right? The man box. So if we see these works, these lyrics, right, for example, as an outlet for that, then we're not as concerned about the music as we are as educating the people. So I'm not for censorship, I'm for education and literacy. So I feel like it's a kind of I don't know if it's the chicken or the egg, right? Do these lyrics promote this idea, or do the lyrics express the cultural ideas that are already there? It's a complicated discussion. It's a complicated question. It is my personal belief that music expresses the beliefs of things that are there. It might promote some things to a few people, but I think it's an expression, and I think that addressing and educating the members of the community is more important than trying to censor the music.
Thank you. Thank you. Last question, and again, I apologize, folks. We're just running out of time. We can't field more questions for you. But the last question is there any research or an understanding in terms of why mixed race individuals have a higher rate of sexual assault, right? Is there any research or general understanding that you've been able to find in terms of, because this is an interesting feature, why
it is an interesting question. It's a very interesting question. And I've been looking, there's some statistics, there's not enough research on it. I did find gosh, it's been a while since I read this, but there are some Latin American historians that have looked at this issue since in Latin American society during the conquest and until, you know, the beginning of the century, mixed race individuals were viewed as a lower status in many ways. And so that could have something to do with it. But as far as I know, there's just a few statistics. I believe there's one study, but I would have to look into that a little bit more. If whoever asked that question wants to email me, I'd be happy to engage.
All right, the person who asked that question, you've heard it from Ms. Julitza. We are going to have to bring it to a close. I want to say thank you very much for a very, very interesting and thought-provoking presentation, right? I really enjoyed this, right? And so, folks, thank you for staying by. I am going to shift this over to Professor Fischel from Alabama A&M, right? She's going to give you our closing remarks, right, as we close out. Thank you.
Thank you, George. Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can. We can hear it and see you. Okay.
Well, this has just been a wonderful, wonderful time that we've been able to come together and talk about such an important issue. As the title of the presentation said, us too. It's not just about it's not just about dealing with what I'm going through, but also it's a way of us coming together and helping each other. And that's what we do in social work. Before I close, I just want to say on the behalf of Dr. Perry, who is the chair of the Social Work, Counseling and Psychology Department, I just want to, on her behalf, say thank you so much to the planning committee for this wonderful conference. I want to thank Addie Wagner, who has done so much to pull this together. When we were planning this program, as was said, we were going to do a full-scale conference. We had students from Oakwood University and from Alabama A&M. They actually were ready to implement a program on each of the campuses that would provide students with education. They were working with the counseling department at Alabama A&M and working with other departments at Oakwood to actually do a stand or have stands, workshops, focus groups. So it was an exciting class activity, and I just want to give a shout out to my Methods 3 class, a macro class, and also to macro class at Oakwood University. So we thank you guys for being willing to participate in this in the day that we had planned, and we just thank you for your support. I also want to thank Julitza Fontaine, who is also part of the planning committee, Adrian Matthews, George Ashley, and our student members who came to our meetings, Nia Carrington, Dejane Bergine, and Ashley May. And also thank you to Dr. Octavio Ramirez for his support, and to anybody else that was involved with helping to make this happen. And of course, our presenters, thank you so much for taking the time out to be here. So I just want to just quickly close by saying that we will be posting the PowerPoints, and this of course was recorded as well. And I just want to finally say that UsToo involves all of us working together to prevent and help others heal from the devastating effects of sexual assault, harassment, stalking, intimate partner violence. UsToo involves us knowing our rights as citizens, as students, faculty, understanding the policies of Title IX designed to protect our rights and not to silence us. And UsToo means men stepping up to partner with women to end sexual violence. UsToo means working with our school administrators and our churches to help and protect victims and survivors of intimate partner violence and sexual assault. UsToo means addressing the isms, the sexism and racism that continues to be barriers for women of color, for men of color, and for members of the LGBTQI community that may not come forward because of these isms. we need to take this seriously. UsToo also represents that we take the sexual assault and harassment of women of color seriously, and that we view it in the same way that we view it for other racial groups. As Sojourner Truth said, "Ain't I a woman?" That as human beings, we are all to be respected and to be given the same rights and protections that anyone else would be given. So my hope is that this workshop will at least start a conversation about what we can do as a college community here in Huntsville, Alabama, as a university town, to address this issue of sexual assault. And I pray, and we are looking forward to having more workshops like this in the future. As we said, we want to have a full-scale workshop, hopefully next spring, but we are also looking to do some workshops in October for Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And as Addie, I know Addie's going to put up a PowerPoint or put up a screen with information for those of you who want to make contact with Crisis Services of North Alabama, AshaKiran. And as she said, there are people, if you need support after this meeting, there are people that you can speak to get that support. So thank you so much for attending. And I know Dr. Ramirez is going to give some information about how to go about getting CEUs for this presentation.
Yes, Helen, thank you so much. I do want to echo George, Helen's words and congratulating every individual who put this conference together, also those that participated, and I also want to thank those who have attended. So having said that, any individual who is interested in receiving CEUs, we are asking you to please complete the evaluation at the end of the conference that is coming to an end, especially at the bottom of the survey. We want you to complete it and give us your information, and we will make sure that we'll get the certificate, the CEU credits out to you. But again, you have to complete the evaluation form to make sure that you receive your CEUs. I think on that, George, I'm sending it back to you. Thank you all.
Thank you. Helen?
Yes. So thank you guys. Thank everyone. AAMU, OU, AAMU in the house. Thank you for coming out. Thank you for our community participants. And thank you for coming.
All right, y'all, I'm going to go ahead and share the screen so that you guys can see the survey. There's a QR code that you can scan really easily. Or you can click on the SurveyMonkey link.
And Addie, could you just say a word about accessing the slides that we want in terms of emailing it to the participants?
Yes. For everyone who registered through the Eventbrite, I have your email address, and I will send those slides out likely later today. It may be tomorrow, along with where you can find the recording. I'll include the SurveyMonkey link as well, because I can see that our numbers are dropping fairly quickly.
Yes.
And I wanted to make sure that
I'm
everybody
glad you placed the SurveyMonkey link in the chat.
Yeah. How do they click on the link, Addie?
It's in the chat room, and they can also, if they have a smartphone, they can hold up the QR scanner code and scan that. But I want to make sure that before everybody jets out of the room, that they have this information for AshaKiran and Crisis Services, because we are available 24 hours a day, and we want to make sure that people reach out for help. So there are those. Take a screenshot if you want, or I mean a picture of it, excuse me. And now I'll go back. to the survey. If you have any questions about the slides or the survey, you can email me, Addie, at adde@csna.org, and I'll be happy to answer those questions. I'll leave that up for just a moment more, and then we'll likely end the session.
Okay. Somebody forgot that their microphone is still on.
And I will say, everyone, thank you for bearing with me while I had those technical difficulties, and my hollering baby.
Mm-hmm.